Thank you, Mr. President. I think every community has one. The iconic American diner. Its definition, as has been officially outlined, is, quote, a friendly place, usually mom and pop with a sole proprietor that serves basic, home-cooked, fresh food for good value. This is sort of an official definition. It was coined by a gentleman named Richard Gutman, who is regarded as the curator and expert on all things diner. In 1955, 4 years before Alaska won statehood, our very own iconic American diner opened in Anchorage, and it was called the Lucky Wishbone. It was a friendly place. It featured pan-fried chicken, real cheeseburgers, great milkshakes, by the way, and French fries that had been cut from potatoes just that morning. Fitting squarely within Gutman's definition, it was a mom and pop. Mom was Peggy Brown. Peggy passed away in 2011 at the age of 87 after a long struggle with Parkinson's disease. And Pop was George Brown, who passed away on January 13 at the age of 96. This is the story of two extraordinary individuals that helped build our community, helped build our state in remarkable and very humble ways. George, along with his partner at the time, Sven Jonasson, built the restaurant with their own hands. Sven exited shortly thereafter, and Peggy became George's business partner as well as his life partner. She did the books, she greeted the guests, she was involved in every aspect of the enterprise. In 2002, the Lucky Wishbone was named Alaska's Small Business of the Year. When you think about it, there's nothing more homegrown, nothing more truly small business and entrepreneurial than that small diner that everybody calls home. Peggy flew back to Washington, D.C. to receive the award in 2002. She was introduced at the time to President George W. Bush by Senator Stevens. And Senator Stevens told the president, he said, "This lady makes some of the best fried chicken in the country." You wouldn't think that coming from Alaska, but I can testify from personal knowledge that that is a fact. The Lucky Wishbone, I expect, will continue on. It is a successful business with a large, large following. But with the passing of Peggy and now George, it marks the end of an era for us back in Alaska. We have lost two beloved pioneers who were dear friends to so many of us, and I am proud to count myself among that group. It's important that we acknowledge their place in Alaska's history, and that's what I intend to do briefly today. George was a native of Wisconsin. He attended high school in Red Wing, Minnesota. He joined the Minnesota National Guard. He was selected for Officer Candidate School. In 1943, George and Peggy met, and they married the next year in 1944. It's said that they met over Formica. George was training to be a pilot, and Peggy was a waitress. And some would suggest that their destiny as operators of an iconic diner was sealed at that very moment. But World War II came first. George received orders to go to India. He was one of those brave pilots who navigated military aircraft over the Himalayas, colloquially known as the Hump. And coincidentally, another significant figure in Alaska's history flew those same routes during the war. That guy's name was Ted Stevens. After the war, George and Peggy returned briefly to the Midwest. They bought a share in a restaurant. In 1951, they sold their share. They took off for Alaska in a 1949 Nash. It was a pretty bumpy, dusty, 2-week journey, we're told. Upon arrival, George worked construction on Elmendorf Air Force Base and helped build a home for his family. They moved to Arizona for a short time in the 50s and tried out another restaurant. At that time, it was in Tucson. Didn't work, it was a flop. They returned to Alaska to try again, and this time, it was no flop. On the occasion of the Wishbone's 50th anniversary in 2005, George recalled the Wishbone's first week in business. He shared this with a reporter of the Anchorage Daily News, Deborah McKinney, and he said as follows: "The first day we took in $80. The second day, $125. Then we went to $300 on Saturday, I believe it was. We were totally swamped. And on Sunday, it was $460. At that time, why, of course, coffee was 10 cents, a jumbo hamburger was 65 cents, a regular hamburger 40 cents, a milkshake 35 cents, that kind of thing. Things were looking pretty good after that first week. From then on, the business grew and grew and grew." Those were George's words. And 50 years later, according to McKinney, the Wishbone was serving up over 1,000 chickens a week, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 a year. Now, serving up all that food, of course, requires a pretty big team. George and Peggy had 4 children, and every one of them put in time at the Lucky Wishbone. Patricia Brown Heller, Pat Heller, is one of those children. She's the oldest of the 4. She tells the story about her involvement working in the restaurant. She says she pretty much cut her teeth in the restaurant. She was the fastest peeler and potato slicer at the Wishbone. She says on the order of 200 pounds a day. She was working in the family's restaurant, again, cutting those potatoes, peeling them every morning, cutting them every morning. Pat decided that the restaurant was not going to be her career and decided to go another route. She was the longtime state director for the former Senator Murkowski, my father, Senator Frank Murkowski, and then when I came to the Senate, she continued on as my state director in 2003. But Peggy has always, as her siblings have been, a true fixture along with her parents at the Lucky Wishbone. The demands of the business required growth in the workforce, and George and Peggy maintained a high standard and demanded much of their employees. Many chose to stay. They were adopted into the Browns' extended family. And if you ask people throughout Anchorage if they know somebody who has worked at the Lucky Wishbone, I can tell you that extended family is pretty large. It's pretty significant. George and Peggy were known for giving away $30,000 to $40,000 in Christmas bonuses, health insurance, and pensions. They were very protective of the health of their customers and their employees, and the Lucky Wishbone became smoke-free long before it was fashionable, and not without more than its share of controversy, because many of their customers like to smoke, but not at the Wishbone. Now, oftentimes, when Mom and Pop passes away, the business dies with them, but fortunately, that won't be the case here. Ownership responsibilities going forward will be shared by Pat and 2 long-term employees of the Wishbone. And out of love and respect for George and Peggy, they've made a commitment to Anchorage, so nothing is going to change. It's comforting to know that the chicken will still be wonderful, the cheeseburgers will still be real, the milkshake's good, and of course, the French fries, cut fresh that morning. Community is a highly valued concept back home in Alaska. George Brown may have set out to run a successful restaurant, but what he did was he created a community institution, a place for people to talk about golf or flying or whatever the issues of the day. We have a tradition, I guess you can call it a tradition in my family. During a campaign, when you come to election day, there's oftentimes not much more that can be done. You've gotten your message out, you're just kind of waiting for people to vote. And so tradition in our family is we go out for a nice lunch. And we always go to the Lucky Wishbone on Election Day. I think I'm going to continue that one. But this is a place where the coffee's warm, the food is hearty, a place where the smiles and the hugs have always been readily available. And as much as I have missed Peggy since she has passed, I will certainly miss George. I will miss his smile, I will miss his conversation, but it's comforting to know that their legacy will continue. On February 11th, so this weekend, George's friends and supporters and admirers will gather at the Alaska Aviation Museum to celebrate his life. It's really an appropriate place for George because he was a pilot, once a pilot, always a pilot. He had 73 years experience at the cockpit at age 94 when he landed his last Cessna on Deshka Lake to fish. I just had an opportunity to speak with Pat before I came to the floor, and she's worried that the location that they've chosen for the service will be too small because they anticipate some 400 Alaskans that come to gather. And she made the comment to me, she said, you know, at 96, you wouldn't figure that there would be that many people at someone's service. And I reminded Pat that George was that person who touched so many people's lives, whether as a pilot, whether as a small businessman, whether as a community leader, or whether just the generous man with a good cup of coffee who would sit at the banquet table with you there at the Lucky Wishbone and just share a conversation. He was a man of many talents and extraordinary good heart and goodwill. And on behalf of my Senate colleagues, I bid farewell to this outstanding Alaskan. I extend my condolences to his family and to all those whose life he enriched. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and would suggest the absence of a quorum.